Hello, I'm the Media Wiz, because when our form wasn't enough, and back at it again with another movie vlog. I was requested by a good friend of mine to talk about the anime series Cardcaptor or Cardcaptor Sakura, and I decided, it has a movie, so I decided I would talk about the movie for this video. And I did briefly skim through enough of what the show is about to at least prepare myself mentally. And basically what you need to know is Cardcaptor Sakura, it was originally a manga, and then in the very late 90s, from like 97 to 2000 I believe, is when it had an anime. And right off the bat, the movie looked like the kind of anime that I would often see pop up on Toonami when I originally watched it, when Toonami came out in the early 2000s. And lo and behold, Cardcaptors was actually an anime that they showed there, specifically the English dub. And I think this is the reason she asked me to talk about this anime in particular, is because, knowing that I'm a massive Ed Netty fan, the English dub of this show has a lot of Canadian voice actors, and I recognized a good handful of them. You got your Brian Drummonds and your Nicole Olivers, and I'll talk a little bit about their performances throughout the movie. But you also have the voices of the Eds in the movie, which that was really, really surprising to me. Cardcaptor Sakura is about a girl named Sakura, and, she is tasked with being a card captor, and what that entails is she has magical girl abilities, where she has to go around and seal these ancient creatures and these ancient mystical powers back inside of these cards that she found in a spell book in her father's library. So, yeah, that's the general plot of the show, and I was a little bit worried going into the movie because there's been plenty of times where I've seen movies that were based on anime that I actually never watched beforehand. So most of the time, I would end up watching the anime after I watched the movies, with obvious exceptions. Back when I was a kid and I kept up with Pokemon, I kept up with the anime and then eventually watched the Pokemon movies until eventually I fell off the wagon. I talked a little bit about that with my one of my Pokemon album reviews. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the same way. I kept up with Yu-Gi-Oh! For a decent amount, and then I watched the movie, and I remember the Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie being great. The Pokemon movies, I mean, the first one, there's some flaws, to be sure, but I mean, I generally remember liking it. I remember liking the first few, and then I think 4 was the last one I watched, and, I stopped. Maybe that'll be a video sometime in the future on this channel, who knows. But anyway, yeah, so there was a couple times where there were anime shows that I kept up with, specifically when I was younger, and then eventually I watched the movies for them. This is one of those instances where I actually knew very little about the source material before, eventually brushing up on it a little bit, and then finally watching this movie. And I'm going to specifically talk about the dub. We'll say this, just to get this out of the way, I thought the subtitled version was actually better. I felt like the subtitled version actually did a better job conveying this story, which, as far as I can tell, it's not really a major part of the Cardcaptor series. I've seen a couple of reviews that listed this as kind of a side story, that it's not really part of any major story. I can't confirm or deny how true that is, but as far as I can tell, yeah, I mean, I was actually kind of surprised how lower scale the tension in this movie was. But anyway, before we even talk about any of that, let's just get into the story itself. So, Sakura, like I said, card captor, she has these abilities, and she's supposed to go around collecting these ancient deities and put them back in these cards. And then she collects the cards and puts them back in the spell book. The movie begins, and she's having this reoccurring dream about some strange woman, and it seems like she's drowning in a large body of water. One thing about the cards that you gotta know is that they're connected to this ancient mystical person called Clow Reed, and hence why they're called the Clow Cards. He comes into play. He's probably a major character throughout the series, I assume. It seems to be dead, but he seems to be the one that has some kind of deep connection with the cards. And, I bring all this up because it's going to come into play way later in the story. But she keeps having this reoccurring dream of this woman, and apparently in these dreams she keeps getting, held down by some kind of fabric or whatever that this woman has that act kind of like tentacles, and they just drag her down into this large body of water, and she feels like she's drowning. There's also birds. We got to mention that. There's also birds that keep popping up, specifically 2 birds that are always flying around, and they're connected to this woman in these dreams. It's some very Freddy Krueger type stuff. And I mean that verbatim because later on, there's a part where she has a nightmare and she wakes up, and in the dream, like they wrap around her wrists and they drag her down, and then when she wakes up in the real world, she has like marks on her wrists. So it is very Freddy Krueger. Something happens in the dream, it happens in reality. But anyway, so her and her friends, they're in school and they're going on spring break, and so her and her friend, in the dub they call her Madison, they duck into a convenience store, and they're having a raffle. This raffle involves you sticking your hand into a box and pulling out a colored ball, and whatever color the ball is determines what kind of prize you get. And because she pulls out a gold ball, she ends up getting a week's trip to Hong Kong. So her and her friends, as well as her brother, not her father, because her father is supposed to be going away on a business trip for a week. So she's going to be under the watchful eye of her older brother, Tori, who is played by Tony Sampson from Ed, Edd n Eddy. He's the voice of Eddie. And, she also has this little, funny animal goofball sidekick played by Matt Hill. The thing is, if you're familiar with voice actors, specifically Canadian voice actors, you probably are aware of this, but Matt Hill and Samuel Vincent, they regularly get work. They're the voices of Ed and Double D. Tony Sampson is the one that, he's voice acted and been in a couple of things, but he's the one that is probably the least known as a voice actor. After Ed, Edd n Eddy, he pretty much moved on to doing music and doing a lot of physical labor, apparently. But so this is one of his few voice acting roles, and I gotta say, hearing him play the kind of low-key type of character that he is in this, it was blowing my mind for the most part. Every time, like, even the parts where he gets mad, he's not really, it's not exactly the same character, obviously, but, I'm just so used to hearing him yell as Eddie and just, shut up, Sarah! That kind of thing. This movie, and I'm assuming the rest of the series where he appears, he's more, get back here, like when he's pissed off at something. It's way different than Eddie. It was really throwing me for a loop. Versus Samuel Vincent plays an older guy who's around the same age as her older brother, Tori. And Samuel Vincent's character's name, well, in the dub, is Julian. And he's basically Double D, except maybe a little bit more even keel. He's not as nerdy as Double D, but he's still very much the charming, young, nerdy guy with, his glasses. He's kind of like Double D if he was just a little cooler, essentially. I guess Sakura has a thing for him. I'm assuming that's also part of the show. That's one of the few things I actually wasn't too sure about, but, going off of this movie, I can only assume that's what they were going for. They're sightseeing, they're having a good time. You're having Kiro, talk about trying to get a bunch of food because he apparently just loves food. There's a whole scene where they're at a restaurant and they get a bunch of meals that look like they could just feed them for an entire week there in one sitting, and they're trying to hide Kiro from the other guys because it's this is a thing in the anime, I guess, where it's one of those things where the main characters are kids and they have to keep all this magical girl stuff a secret from their elders, like her older brother and this Julian guy. So they're trying to hide Kiro, and it's like, oh, he keeps hiding in these like food packages, and oh, don't grab that one, take this one. Oh no, I don't want this one. And of course he's slipping around trying to stay out of sight. They go to this place called Bird Street where there's a bunch of birds, they're sightseeing, everything's going good at first, but then these two birds that are similar to the birds in Sakura's dream show up. And Sakura follows them to this well, which then leads her into this like trance-like state where she's face to face with this strange woman. And again, the woman tries to like grab her with these like cloth tentacle things that every time they show them, they look like, it was reminding me of Kids Next Door where the Toilinator guy shoots out toilet paper and they wrap around people's ankles and wrists and whatnot. That's what it was reminding me of. But anyway, Lee, who's like a kid from her class, shows up and snaps her out of this trance and essentially saves her and invites her and the rest of her friends and family over to their place for the evening. And there's also this one girl who's played by Nicole Oliver, who's another well-known Canadian voice actress. And she also plays the main villainess of the movie. And I gotta say, out of the two characters, it was really confusing to see her play snotty girl character versus having her play the villainess of the movie, where maybe it's just because I've heard her so long as Celestia. It sounded like she was channeling like an evil version of Celestia. So yeah, I was like, okay, that sounds more like a Nicole Oliver character. Seeing her play this like snotty girl, that was really throwing me for a loop. But so they're at they're at Lee's family's house, and well, they get new clothes. Sakura and Madison, as well as Tori and Julian. But and apparently Lee has a bunch of older sisters, and as soon as they see the two girls in these outfits, they're just like, "Oh my gosh, they're so cute! Oh, I just want to pinch their cheek." They just like smother them essentially. But then when the guys come in with their new clothes, the girls immediately flock over to them, and they're the one of them seems flattered by it, the other one's just kind of like, eh. And I was. The many times I kept flashing back to Ed, and Eddie because of the voice actors. I was just like, well, it's better to be swarmed by these girls than being swarmed by the Canker sisters, I guess, right? But yeah, so everything seems to be going well at first. Then we see Lee's mother. She seems like a very disciplinary type of parent. As soon as she enters the room, Lee stands to attention, and his sisters all calm down around the mother. She seems like a very strict kind of person, but of course she's hiding some kind of secret because she is aware of all the magical stuff that Sakura is, delving into, which also sort of leans into the fact that Lee himself is a card captor. But then this is when we get another dream sequence, and this one goes even further. This is the part where Sakura wakes up and she has the mark from being, restrained by this strange woman and her her birds that turn into like cloth tentacles or whatever. So yeah, it seems like some really awful crap is going down. So then they go to Lee's mom, and Lee's mom has the answers. She sends her on this kind of mystical, montage, I guess is the right word. I guess, I don't know, but it's like she basically she kicks some knowledge, she spits some wisdom, and helps her along. And this carries over into the next day where they leave Lee and his family and they go journeying, but Sakura just cannot shake what is appearing to her in these nightmares that she's having. She ends up finding those two birds yet again, this time at what seems like an abandoned store, but it turns out that it actually does have somebody working there who's an old man, but he's essentially a throwaway gag. But when they get to the store, she finds this book that has an image on it, which comes into play later. But she opens the book and she ends up opening up the world of whoever this woman is. We learn a little bit more about this woman. Her name is Su Young, and well, they end up in her realm because Sakura, in her trance-like state, opens the book and water just floods out of the book, and not one thing leads to another, and they wake up in her reality. And what you need to know is that her and Crowry, they were in love at one point, but eventually one thing led to another, and she tried to convince him that they could both take over the land together with their magic, and Crowry ended up banishing her into an alternate reality, and that's where this water-filled world that she dwells in is supposed to be. So it's up to our card captors to try and stop her at first, oh, and she traps Sakura's friends in bubbles, which was reminding me of the MLP Season 4 finale, where that's what T-Rex did and was tempting Twilight to hand over her magic. But anyway, yeah, Sakura and Lee then leap into a fight sequence against her, and they use their card captor abilities, and well, they're able to rescue Madison, and they get out of there, and then that's when Kiro launches into a whole, exposition about like where she came from and what's her connection to Crowry and whatnot. So they go back. Sakura is now all dressed up in this waterproof outfit that Madison made for her. I will say the comedy in this movie, not every joke lands, but the few jokes they have in there that are pretty charming, it's very charming. It's not one of those anime movies from around that time where in the dub they had to like include a bunch of pop songs for the soundtrack and had to crowbar in a bunch of pop culture references just because that's what they think American audiences wanted. This one actually, for the most part, while it's not a perfect dub or anything, I think they actually did a pretty decent job at maintaining the feel of the original. Again, I do prefer the subtitled version from what I was able to see of that, but this one, you know, dub was not that terrible, at least in my opinion. Soo Young ends up destroying this reality around her, and she ends up in the real world, and she chases after Sakura, and she actually manages to capture her and basically force her underwater, because she seems to refuse to believe that Crowry has actually died, because she keeps telling her that Crowry isn't alive anymore, but in a fit of rage she drowns her in water. And then that's when Sakura finally realizes, because she has a vision that shows that Crowry did like her and, you know, didn't want to imprison her forever. He wanted to just put her away so that eventually she could be released and hopefully learn that it's not about taking over the world. Of course, he died, and he basically left her trapped there in that world forever with no means of coming back. And so Sakura tells her this, and the ending, while it is, I can see people saying it was anticlimactic, I actually kind of liked the fact that the tension in this movie wasn't just, you know, the typical, oh no, bad guy gonna take over the world. I mean, that is technically implied, but it never really, it felt more like the main motivation here was that she was just trying to get her friends back. You know, there was the added bonus of, oh yeah, and I guess she's gonna try and take over the land. But for the most part, it felt like it was more a self-contained kind of story. Like a lot of people described it as a side story. It wasn't like the Digimon movie or even the first Pokemon movie where it was like, oh man, this is so giant, this is going to affect the entire world. We better stop these bad guys or this bad thing that's going to happen that's going to take over everything. This was more like, yeah, that's important, but also the main motivating factor was Sakura just wanted to get her friends back. And in fact, when Soo Young disappears and her friends reappear, she's just, it's a very simple just, you're all back. You're here again, and you're here again. It's just it's very simple and sweet. And then the movie ends with them saying something along the lines of, well, first of all, I like the fact that, of course, in one of these kind of stories, the adults don't remember anything that happened. And Sakura is talking with Madison and Kiro, and she says something to the effect of like, well, I guess they don't remember anything. It would be difficult to explain this, I guess, but it seems like we'll probably have to come back to Hong Kong sometime in the future. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I could see people complaining, oh, sequel bait, oh god, but it was just kind of like, we're doing this, oh, we're gonna have to come back eventually, sometime down the road, if this movie does well and we feel like making another, But yeah, it was very cheeky. It didn't feel like a force like, oh man, we gotta make another one. But yeah, as someone who wasn't all too familiar with the source material and watching this movie as its own thing, and only knowing a little bit about the series going into it, I gotta say this movie wasn't that bad. Again, I do prefer the subtitled version. If you're gonna watch this movie, watch the subtitled version. The dub is not perfect, but I can also commend them for the fact that, again, it's not like the Digimon movie or something like that where, oh man, we're 4 kids, we gotta translate this to American audiences and make this incredibly goofy and silly and make every other line of dialogue a joke. But, or crowbar in a bunch of really forced late 90s, early 2000s pop songs in here. So I'll give this movie a lot of credit for that. And as its own story, it's like, I was able to follow it for the most part. Like, there was a few things I had to look up, but for the most part, as its own movie, it's fine. It's a very fine kind of movie. I did like the characters, and it wasn't just because a lot of them were played by either Canadian voice actors or voice actors from one of my all-time favorite shows with Ed, and Eddie. But yeah, I liked the main characters. I liked Sakura. I liked her friend Madison. I thought they had a lot of really cute, funny banter back and forth. The times they had the Eds playing other characters, I did enjoy that. It was especially fun to see Tony Sampson play a character that wasn't just another version of Eddie. Samuel Vincent did a good job as Julian, and Kiro, I've heard Matt Hill play goofball characters in a bunch of stuff. I gotta say, his character in this was way more interesting than his character in Captain N, the Game Master. That just goes to show how talented of a voice actor Matt Hill is. But yeah, I like the characters. I thought the story was fine. It never felt rushed, and it never felt like it dragged. Like this movie was the perfect length. There was never a part of the movie where it's like, oh man, this is just dragging forever, and I wish it was over. Oh god, this is taking forever. I guess maybe you can argue that maybe the ending is a little bit rushed, but for the most part, I actually liked how the ending of the movie played out. And I was a little bit worried. I'm like, oh, is this going to be a forced redemption arc we're going to have here? But it was actually believable when you have it that Sakura finally convinces her that Crowry is dead and that he never intended her to suffer and to be trapped there forever. I did like that. For the most part, I did believe how that ending played out, and I thought it was a very sweet way of ending the movie. But yeah, overall, it's not a perfect movie or anything, but it's perfectly fine. Maybe fans of the show would enjoy it. I mean, I don't know. Apparently, from what I can tell, the show actually went for a decent amount of time. It went from 97 to 2000, so, and this movie came out in 99, so yeah, this seems to be like when the show was just about to wrap up, or close to wrapping up. Yeah, again, I'd actually have to look a little bit more into the show itself, but, you know, watching this movie as its own thing, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a perfectly fine enough movie. That does it for this video. Look forward to the next video, which is going to be the 600th MediaWiz video. Yes, and, well, I've talked about worst songs I've reviewed, and worst games I've reviewed, and worst movies, and TV shows, and written media. This time, we're just gonna end it all. This is gonna be the end-all be-all for MediaWiz. Not that it's the last MediaWiz video, but this is probably gonna be the final worst of video, you know, milestone episodes. And it's just going to be a countdown of top 10 worst things in general that I've talked about for MediaWiz. So yeah, that's what to expect next time. But until then, I'm the MediaWiz, because one art form wasn't enough.